Welcome to the Higher Love with Megan podcast with me, your host, Megan Cooper, a trauma-informed therapist, life coach and disruptor of wellness norms based in Brighton, UK. This isn't another nice-to-have wellness podcast. Instead, this podcast seeks to redefine what it means to be well in today's world. Here, we challenge the status quo, seek to reunite wellness with social justice and improve accessibility, diversity and inclusivity within wellness and beyond. As a listener, you are not here to passively consume. Instead, you are an ambassador for real, embodied, societal and systemic change in the world. As your host, I stand for radical self-inquiry and being able to have those confronting but necessary conversations so that we can remember our collective humanity at this time. We're here for the revolution and you've got a front row seat.
Viv and Kaia, I'm so happy to see both of your faces individually, but having you both here together is a real delight. I loved the episode, Viv, that we did a year ago, which I can't believe it's gone so fast. And Kaia, we've done various things together, including our podcast episode last year. And I said at the end, I really have to introduce you to Viv. I think the two of you would have so much affinity, but so much shared alignment in the way that you see the world, the projects that you're involved with. Welcoming you both to the podcast.
Thank you for having us. I'm so excited for this.
Yeah, ditto.
Some people may have already listened to both of your episodes before, but to jog people's memories or people who you are new to, I would love for you both to introduce yourself in any way that you would like to this morning.
I am Viv Grant. I am the Director of Integrity Coaching, a company that supports the emotional, mental health and well-being of school leaders, with a particular focus also on race equity in schools.
My name is Kaia. My pronouns are she, her, and I am an anti-racist or racial justice educator and advocate. Also director and founder of Youth the Gap and director at Edge of Difference. So all things to do with diversity, equity and inclusion, education reform, and really just anything that's intersectional with social justice, I think is important for us to have on the table for us to discuss. So really about bringing ordinary people to have those meaningful discussions.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for those introductions.
Before we go on, I'd so appreciate you to hit follow or subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, click those three little dots next to settings to rate the show. On Apple Podcasts, you can leave a review or take a moment to explore how you can rate or review on the platform that you're listening or watching. This makes a difference. I truly believe we need to have more of these conversations to shake up the status quo. We'll beat the algorithm together with your clicks and shares. Now back to the episode.
Obviously, education is a big theme that both of you have in common, although when we had a meeting a few weeks ago, we discovered that you have so much more than that in common. For the sake of the hour that we have together, education is obviously a really important component of both of your work and the arenas in which you move. And so I wanted to just ask both of you, when you think about education, what is the first feeling in your body?
Wow, I love that question. I think for me at first, it's almost like two things that come up that they almost transition. So the first one is discomfort, because I feel in the sense of just how the systems are, how outdated it is, but also then the transition to like hope/joy, because even within these dysfunctional and that being deliberately so structures, there's so many people, from the young people to the educators to those within its ecosystem, that really work hard to, number one, deconstruct it, to try and bend to accommodate people, to try to do the very things that education currently is not. So as much as I recognize and always give space for that discomfort, I hold on to hope and joy always, because I know it's much bigger than that.
Thank you so much. Viv?
I don't know if it's so much a feeling, but it's an image that comes to mind. And it's an image that I often share when I'm speaking with school leaders. And the phrase isn't mine, but it comes from a social activist in the States called Parker Palmer. And he talks about standing in the tragic gap. And so really it builds upon what Kaia was saying, and I really, really just feel this for educators today, that, you know, there's on the one aspect, which Kaia has spoken about, I like to believe that those of us in education, we have a hope. We have a hope for a better world, and we have a hope that things are going to get better. But on the other hand, we have the reality of the world that we live in right now. And there can be that pull sometimes to get caught up in that cynicism. And I think for us as educators, we stand in that tragic gap where there are no certainties. We have to hold on to that hope, but at the same time mitigate any cynicism that's coming from other quarters. So it's more, I said, that image that comes to mind. But again, I think for me, the prevailing feeling would have to be one of hope, because I couldn't be in education all these years if I didn't have a sense of hope that things would get better.
Thank you so much to both of you. So a quote that I really love and that Kaia and I named on our previous podcast together is from Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Did I say it correctly, Kaia, this time?
Yeah, and I might even have it on my bookshelf here.
I had to say it for me. Anyway, the quote goes, "Education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which people deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world." It's such a powerful quote, really talking about how education is either an instrument for conformity or for freedom. And I would like to start with your experiences as students within the education system and how that felt for you. Kaia, I know that this is a big part of your story. I've heard you speak on it on a number of occasions, and also you mentioned it within our podcast of how you never saw yourself within the curriculum or school environment. And when you left school, you went on this mission of re-educating yourself.
I think it's an interesting one. I keep reflecting because often there's things that you remember on top. And I think when you think about your unique experience, I think I see it also as the introduction of how your primary systems also come into play and almost replicate itself. So I remember the frustrations I had even as a woman in the classroom and just seeing the gender dynamics that you'd see often possibly within your first systems of like say your family or your peers, and how that's inherited and seeing that translated into classroom dynamics in terms of who's heard or whose ideas are taken forward or whose ideas are co-opted, and how that is translating into teaching and the dynamics between them. And I think seeing, you know, the amount of things that were said in the classroom that I thought, hang on, is the teacher not going to call this out? Is the teacher not going to say something about this? Are they not going to use an opportunity to educate? And that seemed being dismissed or to be shut down. And I did a training recently with teachers all around anti-racist classrooms and what that looks like. And I touched on that feeling of the tactic to try and close the lid quickly and shut it down as quick as possible often isn't the fastest or a meaningful solution. It kind of soothes that feeling in the moment of that discomfort, right? But what does it do around the wound that is being dug deeper? What you're doing is putting a plaster on top of it. And I think from the collection of seeing that injustice in terms of interventions that were needed, but also in terms of representation, who gets representation, who doesn't. I think it was all of those feelings I had of just frustration, just knowing that there could be something more, but couldn't put my finger on it because your oppressor won't give you the keys to the house, right? So I think wanting to be on that journey to use an opportunity to self-educate, to pretty much go on a hiatus and try and learn the very things, or try to almost soothe my inner child and know that, you know, the very things that you experience, you were right on, or I can affirm it even more and I can give you the language and the tools for you to use that vocabulary, I think is such an interesting experience of also knowing that there is hope and knowing it was also an individual thing of teachers are within the system, right? Students are within the system. So it's not just an injustice, but also an injustice to the people to not know how to deal with things or how to take action on things because they also weren't taught. So I just see it as a collection of injustices really that I'm really passionate now within my present day to go back to that student and knowing it's more than just me.
Thank you. Viv.
So my experience of school, it's funny, I'm sitting here listening to Kaia and I'm thinking, gosh, you know, I was probably at school probably about 40 odd years before Kaia. And it kind of like breaks my heart, to be honest, to hear Kaia talking about her, it's probably quite recent experiences. And when I reflect on my experiences, that there were echoes probably of what Kaia went through when I was at school. What I faced at school was probably more overt, Kaia, than what you faced at school. So I had teachers telling me to go and swing on the trees and eat bananas like my friends and relatives, the monkeys, do. I had my A-level English teacher. We used to, just read out loud in the class, reading Shakespeare at the time. Halfway through, it's my turn to read. She told me to be quiet and never to read aloud in her class again because I couldn't read standard English properly. I had my careers teacher, so I must have been, about 15, 16, and doing one of these whole class lessons, asking us what professions we wanted to go into when we left secondary school. So it was okay when my friends who were white and male said they wanted to be doctors and journalists. And at that time, I didn't even want to be a head teacher. It wasn't even on my horizon. I just said, "Oh, sir, I want to be a nursery nurse." And he told me that was too high an aspiration for me, and I should consider being a cashier in the local supermarket. So you can imagine what my whole inner world was like for me as a teenager, particularly at secondary school, not so much primary school. I hated secondary school for obvious reasons.
Wow. I mean, what an experience within your first experiences within education. So interesting that you then went on to work in schools and work in education and become a teacher and then a head teacher, one of the youngest heads in the UK. How did that come about for you, Viv?
It's funny, I'm laughing. As you're asking me that question, I'm thinking, to be honest, it's a miracle, because when I tell you about the school where I became head teacher, again, no one ever would have imagined, least of all me, for two reasons. One, when I got to the school, I wasn't the head teacher. Again, this is how old I am. I was deployed at the school in terms of what was called a Section 11 teacher. So that's a member of staff who's been deployed to help the underachieving children from the new Commonwealth. Okay, so this was common. This was back in the 90s or whatever. And they made it really blatantly clear to me, the staff at the school, they didn't want me there. So we had a nun who would openly talk about the black boys in the school as gorillas. There was one time I was trying to lead a staff meeting. I ended up crying in the toilets because they were so racist and they were so hostile. It's just unbelievable, really, how I got to be head of that school. Again, I hated it when I first arrived there. And this was a school in the middle of Stockwell, Brixton. So a community that I knew well. My mum when she first came over from Jamaica, she arrived in Brixton. Brixton was her home. And really, it was just a series of, I grew to love that school. I grew to, really form really good relationships with the parents and the children. And so over time, I started to rise up, in terms of status within the school. And so at one point, I was appointed to be deputy. And when I went for the interview, I was still I hadn't even been teaching 10 years then. So I went to be deputy. And I did the interview. Well, two things happened. I went for the interview. I cried in the interview. I didn't think I'd get it. Part of the tears was me I had this inner dialogue. Hang on a minute, I'm standing here. This isn't meant to be. And also, I really care about these kids and this school could really be so much better. And when they debriefed me, the inspector after the interview said to me, "Viv, you didn't do an interview for a deputy headship. You did an interview for headship. And if you're not going to be head of this school, you're going to be head of one of our other schools." But me, I'm just like, what do you know? No way, blah, blah, blah. I was young. I really didn't have a sense that what she saw in me, I didn't see. I knew I was a good teacher. Yeah, that I could hold on to. But be a head teacher, no. But then what happened? Oh, and then also what happened was there was a member of staff who I'm just going to say was openly racist. And she'd said to one of the governors, if Viv gets a deputy headship, it's just because she's black. And then she also cried, apparently, when she heard that I had got it. And then what happened was I'd only been deputy for about less than a year. Again, this just tells you how old I was. Ofsted was introduced for the first time. And we were one of the first schools to be inspected. And to cut a long story short, we failed the Ofsted inspection. The head, who I loved, and I only would have been deputy because I wanted to lead with her, she said, "Viv, I'm going to retire. I can't take it." Again, I cried and cried and cried and cried. Goodness me, long story short, the governors came to me and said, well, Viv, you've been deputy for a year now, so that means you can become acting head. Then after a period, they came to me again and they said, we're going to advertise for the substantive headship. We want you to go for it. And I was like, no, I'm the youngest member of staff. Secondly, I'm also pregnant with my first child. So there's no way I'm going to go for it. But I did. And that's partly because one of the pupils came to me and said to me, Miss Grant, are you going to be our head? And I asked him why. And he said, well, everyone thinks we're failures. And I was just like, hold on a minute. I know that narrative. That's what I carried around with me. And so I thought about it a bit more, asked friends and family. And in the end, I decided I would go for it. So when I was 8.5 months pregnant with my first child, I was interviewed for the post and they said yes.
I'd actually forgotten up until listening back to our podcast yesterday that you were 8.5 months pregnant at this point. When I heard it again on the podcast, I was like, oh my God.
Who does that? Who does that? Who does that? A school that's in special measures and not an easy school and with your first child? No.
I just want to ask you a follow-on question from that. As a teacher and head teacher, looking back into the system from that different perspective, I'm curious how that was for you, holding how it was for you as a student, and then what you saw through the lens of being a teacher and head teacher. How was it looking back into the same system from the different side?
Well, I think really that was the driver for me being a head teacher and a teacher. It's like, no way were children that I was going to either be teaching or leading were going to have the same experience I had. And it was tough. I'm not going to lie. It was really, really tough, particularly when you're young, you're Black, you're female in a system that wasn't made for you to thrive. Yeah. So it was incredibly tough. But with all my soul, with all my heart, it was like those kids are going to have the best deal. Because there's absolutely no way. And I will say this today when I'm speaking to adults or school leaders, you have a choice. And therefore you hold that choice wisely when it comes to our young people, because you hold the future in their hands and it's precious. So for me, it was a sense of actually, they would not experience what I experienced when I was at school.
Thank you. So powerful to share that. Kaia, I would love to come to you now of how did your experience of education inspire you to do what you do now?
Yeah, I think very similar to Viv, I feel like that really touched my heart in the sense of just that sense of really wanting to ensure that you're almost safeguarding the future, that you see the potential. You're seeing the lives that you're impacting. You're seeing, your role within this massive ecosystem, and you're aware of how dysfunctional it is, but you refuse, even underneath those circumstances, to be a continued extension of that injustice. And I think for me, seeing that, and I remember being in teaching for a bit of time in a secondary school, and I was working with young people on the cusp of like maths and English, helping them pass, and that was my role. And I remember it was my first couple days in, and I was a feminist society, and I was really, really keen to make sure that whatever groups there were, I was able to be there, be a role, be active, know that as a young teacher in there, and I think I was probably 19 at the time, with these young people, thinking, you know what, representation is important. I'm going to be your advocate. I'm going to be your voice. And sitting in a meeting with the head teacher where we were discussing things like uniform and skirts, and then basically saying to them that, yes, here's all these promises we're going to make. As soon as the door was closed, the head teacher turned around to me and said, do you remember that you work in a school? And I was like, what do you mean by that? And I was saying about all these changes and the things that we should take forward and how we're going to listen to the voice of the young people. And they said, well, you work in a school. And I was just like, oh, so this is what we mean by those who have the power and how they govern it. This is what you decide to do with it. You don't listen. You decide to impose what you think is best. So I think even trying to go back to the same system that I saw as an injustice and think, how can I do different? To realize that no matter how much individual efforts, almost just like the myths of meritocracy or individualism and those ideologies, even within these structures, you're going to be kind of met with those glass ceilings or those glass walls that you can see right through as an opportunity. But if people aren't ready to make that shift, you can't force them, especially if they are the ones holding that power. So I think for me, I just knew from the end of my teaching, I was like, you know what, I'm not going to go back in this capacity, but I'm definitely going to go back within my own terms and conditions to make that change. And I remember discussing with the young people I was teaching, as this is something I'm trying to do. Would you think this is something that you would like? And from that point on, they followed the mission from that point on with Youth the Gap. So I think seeing that there's student voices embedded from the early start and knowing that that's exactly what they want, it's, that's everything, because it's not just about what I feel as a teacher from a student. It's also relevant to the current students and how they are facing school, which I think is equally important.
Thank you so much for sharing. Viv, I wanted us to come back to you on, you created integrity coaching, which supports heads and school leaders that they, to support them within the work that they do, because, you have shared that actually there is so much expectation on teachers. There's a lot of burnout, there's a lot of overwhelm, and there's so much inner leadership that people can do to support themselves within the role. I would love for you to name what that process looks like.
I think it works in a number of ways. I should maybe clarify what we mean when we talk about attending to the inner work. So for me, when I was a head teacher, and then when I transitioned from head teacher to leading integrity, there was this real sense, and I think I shared with you, Megan, on that podcast, when I found myself one night just crying in my car, just crying. I can't do this job. It's too difficult. And what made me realize that there was something else that needed to be attended to was when I went back into school the next day, and I'm thinking, well, who can I talk to? It's like, well, can't talk to my chair of governors, can't talk to the school improvement advisor, because all they focus on are results, outcomes. I know that that's not what I need help with. It's what's going on in here and how I am engaging with the pressures of the role, what it is to do with my backstory, what it is to do with my emotions, how my values are being tested. So it's very much around that sense of actually being able to understand that, I have a purpose. And I would say if we were to think about the framework that we work with school leaders, I always say, if you think about just the 3 Ps, purpose, first of all, why? What's your why for being in the profession? And I had an incident that happened very, very recently. It broke my heart, if I'm honest. And I remember reflecting with colleagues one of the reasons why it broke my heart. And I said, because I'd never worked with a school before. This is the very first school, very first senior leadership team where I couldn't get to their why. There was no clarity. There was no sense of what brought them in. And it pains me. But if we can get that first P clear, what's your purpose? What's your why? And then if we go to the second P, which is pain, because pain is going to happen. It is part of being human. And I think in school leadership, what tends to happen is, and I think it's in life in general, we kind of go, there's something wrong with me. No. Challenges are going to come. So it's how you make sense of whatever challenge has arisen. And then we move to the third P, which I call perspective. So with that learning and that wisdom, what's a new perspective that has arisen? And how does that then strengthen your purpose? So that's how I would talk about it as a reflective practice. So I'm always going to be an educator. It's always going to be at my heart. It's always going to be part of who Viv Grant is. I've had to face many second Ps, pains in my life. And a significant one was 2 years ago when I was diagnosed with uterine serous carcinoma, a cancer that's dominant in women of colour. But out of that pain, out of going through that journey, a greater wisdom arose. And part of that greater wisdom was my second book, Learning to Walk in the Dark. And out of that was this sense, for me as director of integrity coaching, okay, I understand more now about the journey of the soul. I understand more about when we go on these really, really dark nights of the soul, when we find ourselves in the belly of the whale. There are certain, I've called them the 5 Cs, which are curiosity, commitment, courage, compassion, and connection. But if we can find a way, I would say, to be in conversation with these qualities, I believe anyway, they will help us be in deeper relationship with our purpose. And that's what I found for myself. I had to apply these ways of being, because I don't know how I would have gone through the cancer journey if I hadn't. But it was applying these to my life, to that particular walk, where I suppose I'm back in the world again after that. And I have a deeper commitment to what it means to be an educator, a deeper commitment to what it means to stand up for race equity and social justice.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it came through in the first podcast that we did together. The beginning of this podcast, we talked about your experience of being students
education primarily. And certainly when I think about education, I think about students. I think about people attending schools. But in our conversation, Viv, what was really coming through for me was how much teachers, school heads, people that work within education are also harmed by the system that is in place. And, Kaia, you spoke at the beginning of being in a classroom where things weren't picked up on or dealt with in a way that might have been more meaningful or impactful. And Viv, what I'm hearing from you again there is how all of these parts of ourselves, all of these unresolved, challenging, wounded parts of ourselves are also there as teachers, as educators, as people within the classrooms who are not being supported by a system that allows for or nurtures humanness and helps people to thrive within an environment, and how these systems continue to harm not just the people in the receiving end of it, but also teachers and head teachers. It was so interesting, Viv, when I came to your book launch at the end of last November, which I was so honoured to be able to be a part of. And you interviewed many people that you've worked with through integrity coaching. And it was so interesting to hear teachers and heads' experiences of the system and how, their journeys of being nearly broken by it and nearly wanting to leave and being forced into challenging situations and how they push through. And it was so deeply inspiring. I was hanging on every single word, but it was really coming through for me of how much systemic harm is done, to everyone within that as well. Kaia, I was going to come to you. Anything that you wanted to add to what Viv shared or what I just shared there? Where do you see yourself within it?
Yeah, I think it's so funny because that's how I see almost like our theory of change within education, because everyone's harmed in the system, right? When it's a systemic problem, it isn't just that kind of binary thinking that's been fed to us of, if we see the system, it equates to those who are in education the most and we think pupils, right? But it's also those keeping that infrastructure going even when the cogs are broken. And those are the teachers, and those are especially within the roles where there's so much more demand than ever before. There are little to no resources. There's lack of funding. So if you think about who's trying to protect the students from almost trying to see through that dysfunction, it is those teachers, it is those stakeholders within education who are trying to keep this going, who are trying to safeguard. And that not only just being safeguarding as just like a policy, it's a human thing of wanting to protect another human being, making sure they have the best educational experience. So I think when we think of educational change, education reform, we need to make sure that everybody is involved in that picture, and it isn't just thinking about students being at that center point. Youth are so important within that, but it's everybody who's harmed in that system. So making sure when we think about that liberation and changing and deconstructing, it must involve everybody. There's no point.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading the Integrity Coaching blog yesterday, and I was reading an article called When Silence is Not Safety, Leading for Racial Justice in 2025. And it was written by Integrity Coaching Associate Coach, Dr. Claire Stewart Hall. And it was a really impactful blog. And it came to this paragraph entitled Turning Learning into Leadership. And I'll just read the paragraph here, and then I would love to discuss it. So the paragraph goes, now is the time to utilize what has been learned in all of those hours of training. It is time to deploy strategy to enact conversations that seemingly go nowhere but are crucial. It is time to draw on the diversified and decolonizing curriculum put in place and re-anchor what British means and connect the dots about what Britain has done to the world. It is time to bring your best assemblies about love, solidarity, and the meaning of humanity, community, and sanctuary. It is time to teach unity, problem solving, and how to be an ally. It is time to liberate your staff and children to generate their own ideas and responses to the abhorrence of racism. I found the whole blog deeply impactful, so thank you to Dr. Claire, but that paragraph in particular, it was so powerful and yet poetic and impactful at the same time. When I read that, what comes up for you, Kaia?
I think that sense of collectivism, and I think that empowerment because I think education as a tool is not just to create this kind of social hierarchy, right? Of there's the teachers who know everything and you're teaching the students as sponges. There's equally so much you can learn from each other. And I think knowing that it's being a witness or experiencing racism, a teacher can have, a student can have, anybody at a given moment can have, but the responsibility of being an ally is something that everyone should be taught and be taught effectively. So I think what comes up for me really is that clarity, honesty, real opportunity to set the tone, to remind everybody of the values of what it means to be within that system and how that propels you to be an ally outside of the classroom. And so you feel equipped, not just as, a student, that budding student, but somebody who is equipped to be an adult, to be a human being, somebody who's going to be learning through life and to know that actually it's okay to make mistakes. And I think from those mistakes to be able to learn from it and not to take it personally. So I think a lot of it that comes up is that sense of allyship and what it means, and often bringing coalition into that and understanding that coalition, unity is that human.
Thank you so much, Kaia. Viv, same to you.
Yeah, I think for me, how it resonates with me, just that whole sense of liberation. If we can really get a sense of what it means to be liberated, to ask ourselves to be liberated from what? And then what does that then bring in? And my experience, this side now, I would say, of the race work, I don't know, Kaia, if you're experiencing something similar, but I'm really noticing the resistance and the pushback in a way that I hadn't experienced it 3 or 4 years ago, in a way that has been really bruising and really hurtful at a very personal level. And it's that whole sense that I don't really feel that those who are in power, those who have been racialized as white, this has been my experience, and this is with school leaders now, organizational leaders, recognizing that this is liberatory work. I would say it's a work of love towards self, love towards others, love towards our common humanity. And it really does worry me, the extent to which we're seeing happening over the pond, ripples here in the UK. And so for me, in response to Claire's blog, it is that whole sense we need to be setting ourselves free. And if we can allow ourselves to engage in the dialogue around setting ourselves free from what, in order to bring in something better. But it just, at the moment, it feels as though having those conversations, I feel anyway, that we are being, I'm talking for myself now, I am being called to be brave. I am being, in a way that I always thought I was brave around the race work. But I'm always being called to be even braver, even more courageous in terms of actually speaking about this and holding space to actually have these discussions where actually you know what? I think at the moment we're very much talking about what we're against. I know what I'm for. Let's talk about what we are for, which is what I think Claire's blog does. Talking about what are we for? A greater humanity. Bring in your best assemblies. Bring in that love. Bring in what we are for. That's what it resonates in me.
Yeah, it's really powerful, isn't it? Because I thank you for sharing that, both of you. And what you just said at the end there, Viv, there is so much rhetoric out there, very loudly, isn't there, of what we are against. And this continual inquiry in an equally loud way of really what we stand for, I think is so important. Kaia, I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to add there. Viv, what you touched on of how you're being met with resistance and pushback around doing this work. And Kaia, I remember when we had a conversation last year talking about how this Black History Month had been really quiet compared to previous years. And I know that you've been heavily involved with the BLM groups in Brighton and how that has had like a feeling of kind of decreasing.
Yeah, definitely. I can definitely speak to that resistance as well. I think there's a lot more resistance. And I think especially around that sense of creating an enemy. And I think when there's a lot of kind of airtime for who we're up against, we can also internalize it and start to kind of make enemies of each other. And I think the empire and its tools are really, really good at seeing when it's starting to crumble or people are starting to look through it and think, okay, people are starting to wake up now. What last minute tools can we rehash? We have been in this point in history before. we have started to see the patterns. This is not the first time this has happened. And I think with the amount of injustice that we are seeing and the almost parallel to the resistance towards the work is the very thing that the system wants, because it benefits from people wanting to step back and wanting to see it as a personal attack, see it as something that doesn't affect them until it's very much on their front doorstep. And then they will wake up and think, damn, okay, so what can we do about it? So I think I see it really as the empire is quaking in its boots because it's starting to realize that people are starting to wake up in big numbers. So people will no longer, will obviously start to fuel money into it. People will start to create more kind of like contrast and dialogue to oppose each other. But what we need to be doing in this time is fueling in what you said, Viv, about that love, that unity within this time, because that is what's going to be that combating force, and realizing that when we unite, when we join forces, when we start to wake up and we start to have those meaningful discussions and we are brave and hold hands with discomfort, that's the very thing that the system doesn't want us to do, because then what happens? So I think for us, it is a time that even if you are met with resistance, you are met with almost silence, we know that that's the very thing that the enemy that we all collectively know or starting to wake up to understand wants. So in this time, please, please, please start to come together more, start to understand what that means in unity, because that resistance is not within each other, it's fighting against redirecting that system towards the enemy that we all are starting to understand.
Thank you so much, Kaia. I know that both of you do anti-racist work within schools, but before we go into that, I would love actually for you to say what that work is for you, instead of us contextualizing it as anti-racist work and what we're pushing against, which we obviously are. I would love, firstly, for you to say what that work is standing for in your minds right now. Kaia, if you want to go.
I feel like it will be very, very similar to Viv, if not the same, really. I think it is really around when I think about race work, it often comes with so much discomfort, and discomfort is the biggest teacher, because it's going to be the most reoccurring feeling that you'd have. And in a space where education has been designed for it to be dysfunctional, for you to be on fight or flight, for you to be in a rush, it means that you see discomfort and you often make an enemy of it and run the other direction. So I think for us, within the context of the work that we do, it is centering those really uncomfortable or taboo topics within the intersection and the overlap of education, because it needs to be. And being able to hold hands and give tools for navigating through that discomfort with that being effective, because that is what's going to allow you to navigate through these dialogues, translate that to reform, whether it is the curriculum, whether it is to the structures, whether it is to the policies. Because the more we tap into that very human feeling we all will have, the more change we're most probably going to make as well.
Thank you so much. Viv, what is this work for from your context?
I think I'd say, building on what Kaia has said, there are two things for me. One, I say it's about stewarding the future. Again, teachers as school leaders, you are stewards. You hold something precious. So that's what it's for. It's about the young people in their care. They're the lead. You, Kaia, as I said to you when we met before, you are the leaders of today and tomorrow. Viv Grant's not going to be around forever. Those teachers who taught you aren't going to be around forever. You know, you've probably got more years ahead of you than I have got behind me. So it's about, it's those who are coming before us or ahead of us. And then equally, the question that I will now put, not now, I've always put it to my school leaders when we do the race work is, are you going to be a good ancestor? Again, it's linked to that thing of actually, we're not going to be around. I want Kaia. I want the young folk to say, yeah, I met with Viv Grant, or I met with so-and-so, and it's because of that one conversation, or it's because of X, Y, and Z, why I'm still here and why I'm still doing X, Y, and Z. So that's what I'm for. I suppose it's about legacy, but not in an egotistical way. It's about, because we all leave footprints, don't we? We leave footprints. I don't want mine to be great big clodhoppers. I want them to be gentle footprints that other people can follow and make their own marks in the sand. That's what this work is for. Has to be.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Kaia, I would love for you to explain what the work of Youth the Gap does within schools and what that tends to look like?
Yeah. So for us, we approach schools and recognize it as ecosystems. And we think within that ecosystem, what needs to be changed. So we almost have a 4D framework and also a 5C star framework, which mirrors what Viv was saying earlier, which is all around going through phases to, number one, benchmark and understand where a school is at on its journey, validate that through data, and that being both qualitative and quantitative, using that to inform an action plan. And from that action plan, being able to evaluate its effectiveness as we go along. And that being understood from the anti-racist, Black feminist lens to really transform that change in that ecosystem, and recognizing that each and every school is going to be different. So we may approach one school in one angle or with one priority, but another school is going to need something very, very different. So recognizing each school is capable of change, that change and knows what is needed for that change is going to be different, but knowing that each and every change is valuable and doing that through a range of services, whether that is training, whether it is curriculum review, whether that is doing things with the young people, focusing on the teachers, and doing that all through a long-term plan rather than just one-off lovely tick box exercises that you can put in your Ofsted report, you know? Because I think the one-time things, yes, they can be useful to spark a dialogue or to create a shift or to plant a seed, but we're really, really interested in doing that long-term work to really kind of spark that change and for us to understand where you are at on that journey. And the idea is that when we lead that immediate support with you, it means that you are interdependent as us as an external forever support system, but knowing that you can kind of progress with those changes and continue those changes as we go along, even without us.
Thank you so much. Viv, coming to you of what the integrity coaching, anti-racist, which we're renaming as pro stewarding the future, pro legacy work for this context of the conversation. I'd love for you to describe what that looks like for you within schools working with school leaders.
So the way that I would describe is if you both imagine a set of circles. So there's an inner circle, then there's a middle circle and an outer circle. And all of our work, we will say to everyone, okay, so you have the outer circle, which is what will we do? Then you have the middle circle, which I would say, who are we? Then the inner circle, who am I? And so we say with the work that we do, yeah, eventually it's going to help you with the outer circle. And this is me having been educating for such a long time. When I look how education used to work within this arena, it would always go to the outer circle. And so my curiosity has always been, well, if the outer circle was going to make any real difference, then we wouldn't be having this conversation now. You know, the outer circle is important. Policy, practice, we've got to get it right. But the part of the reason as to why schools still struggled is because people don't look at who am I? How have I been shaped by education? How have I been shaped by the schooling system? How much of that is still alive in me? And when I'm with my senior leadership team, the middle circle, oh God, it's not just me, my own socialization story, it's theirs as well. So we say the way we work is we look at the who am I and we look at who you are. And then the way we do the outer circle, we say, so if you imagine you're a senior leadership team, we will say, okay, look at all your lines, look at your line of responsibility. Look at what you can influence around race work in your school. Then across the year or year and a half that we're working with you, that's going to be your focus. That's where you're going to have agency and where you're going to make change. And so when it comes to our time finished working with you, you're going to feed back to your SLT how you have grown, how you have developed. So again, we link it back to self and then the work. Because I don't want to say I'm done with, I'm not. But what I mean is I can get very frustrated when I see school leaders saying they're going to take, when I think when we first started this work, and I remember with the senior leadership team at the end, it was lovely. But I remember the deputy saying, Viv, you know what? I know the head teacher explained the work and she said how you were going to be working with us across the year. But I really thought it was going to be a tick box exercise. He said, and it wasn't until that first session, I can't remember what the first session, but It's all facilitative. It's all reflecting on their story. They've got to do the race socialization. So a lot of it is around story and telling and being vulnerable with each other and coming and just being honest about who they are and how they've come into education and why race feels so tricky and difficult to talk about. And he was just like, Viv, this journey, I couldn't have imagined it. I couldn't have the places that you took us to. But he's like, yeah, this is what the work is about. And I was like, yeah, this is what the work is about. And he's like, I'm changed now. I am transformed in how I hold this work, in how I engage with our pupils. And so, we say our work is transformative, but again, as Kaia has said, it can't be transformative unless it's difficult, unless it takes the edges of discomfort. You have to. That's where the change happens. I'm not concerned about keeping you comfortable, keeping you in a zone of safety, of emotional safety. Yeah, we have the ethical aspects around it. Or of course, we don't want you to go straight into the panic zone, but it is about transformation from the inside out. Yeah. That's what I would say. That's what we seek to do, is to transform from the inside out. Because again, what we're having, no one is taught how to break the socialization cycle. It becomes norm, becomes a part of how people are in the world. And it's not until you cause people to pause. And so we do a lot, reflecting on your school days, and we get them to look at different models of education, and they say, oh my God. So that's the prevailing sort of philosophy that was around, and that's how it's impacted me and stuff. So you do sort of a range of things, but really it just comes back to the inner work. Know thyself, because if you know thyself, if you know who you are, then you have a better chance of actually being the strong anti-racist advocate for yourself and for our young people.
Thank you. And thank you for naming the inevitable and vital discomfort within the transformation, because, I think that within our world, we want the path of least resistance, right? And of course, with this work, it's just not available. Exactly. It's literally, within this work, it is literally learning to walk in the dark. So I want to leave some space to talk about the fact that on the 4th of February, we are coming up to the 1-year anniversary of your lovely book, Viv, which I actually read in one go, which I don't think has ever happened. I read last year on a really wintry day. I ran myself a very hot bath and I stayed in it for hours and just read the whole book from start to finish. And it was such a special experience. I'd only had one conversation with you, but I really felt you in the words. It was almost like you were reading it to me. And I would love for you just to say how that's feeling 1 year on.
I'm going to get a bit tearful now, because when you're saying 1 year on, so much has happened in this year. So when the book was published a year ago, I didn't even want to celebrate it, because my mum had just died. And actually, it would have been her 99th birthday on Monday. Megan, sorry.
No, thank you for sharing with us, Viv. Take your time.
Funny, I knew I was sitting with something this morning. I suppose how it feels is, if I'm really, really honest, I was learning to walk in the dark when I wrote the book, and it wasn't a book that I ever imagined I would have to write, and not have to write, that would be born through me. But there's still obviously a lot of emotion around it, because it's also tied with my mum's dying. Only now have I just realised the anniversaries around about the same time.
Yeah.
Her birthday, her dying, and the book's publication. So there's a lot within that, really. So how it feels a bit of a miracle that it's out there in the world. But also I feel there's probably still quite a lot within it that I need to sort of review, just to remind myself what this life journey is about, really. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Viv. It's interesting, isn't it? That kind of cyclical somatic membrane that we have in the body, coming up to a sense of 1 year passing, how so much held within that. And it's interesting that, your book, Learning to Walk with the Dark, how synchronistically that did cross over with the death of your mother. And, I know that when we recorded last year, your mother had literally just passed away. And it was interesting how, when you wrote the book, it was really about your cancer journey and, many things in your life up until that point. I'm aware of kind of the cycles of the dark nights, the soul that you went through as a teacher and a head teacher, but it was really about your cancer journey. And then
when the book came out, it was almost like the words took on a new energy in the loss of your mother as well, and how we are continuing to learn to walk in the dark through different chapters of our life, and grief obviously being a present form of your past year, learning to walk in the dark with that as well. It's so interesting, the timing of it as well. Crossover of loss and then the emerging books. Yeah, thank you.
Actually, thank you for that, Megan. You've captured that really well. Thank you. You've really just captured that whole thing about just walking with grief and the cycle of it. Thank you. I think that cyclical thing that you said there, Megan, those seasons, and like us as human beings, I'm talking very generally here, but we are in a season of winter right now, aren't we? It is winter that we're going through. And I think what I'm realizing for myself is I need to be tender with myself right now. So, one of my 5 C's, is compassion. It's weird, really, because I knew it was my mum's 99th birthday on Monday. My sister and I, we shared a couple of texts and whatever about that. And I could feel something here, but I hadn't quite, I suppose, just articulated what it was that I was feeling, carrying here. I just miss her. I suppose it's not to be surprised, but I miss her.
Yeah.
And that grief, it just ebbs and it flows. Ebbs and it flows. So that's what I'm working with at the moment, really.
Viv, thank you so much for sharing. And, I really, what's the word? It's really a great privilege, I think, to be allowed into the internal landscape of somebody. And thank you for sharing the grief that you're walking with. I'm really pleased that you could touch on that and experience some moments of humanness.
Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you. Kaia, you are back. We lost you. Kaia went to go and learn to walk in the dark off camera. No. Kaia, I'd love to pass the mic to you of how you feel like you are learning to walk in the dark in any way, shape or form at the moment.
I love this question, and I think also really resonates with everything that's going on right now. I feel like probably all of us are having that feeling of walking in the dark, of looking at everything that's going on, all the injustices, and thinking, where are we going collectively? What's my role in this? And I think looking and thinking, what is happening in this world and how can this persist, right? And I think learning to walk in the dark, and I think for me in this is seeing the amount of darkness that they want us to see, and not in a way that is to kind of positively gaslight ourselves and think, oh, don't worry, we'll just see love and light. No, okay, let's see what we're dealing with here. Let's see the darkness that there is in the world. And within the uncertainty of it all, position ourselves in as an individual that is capable to promote change. And I think for me is constantly evaluating, constantly understanding with the resources we're in place, especially in a time where it feels unsafe, thinking about where is my position in this, making sure that I'm still making changes, making sure that I can still be, a change with also the people I'm around and be in community. So I think in a time that feels uncertain and very much in the dark, I refuse to sit and be uncomfortable, but also feel demotivated or to feel like giving up, because I know that's exactly how they want us to feel, but wanting to make sure that I still hold on to that hope. I practice that radical hope and that radical empathy to always understand, even if it isn't my lived experience. So I guess walking in the dark for me right now is making sure that in this time that feels daunting, that I still know there is light and we all are holding light within each other. So putting that close together as much as possible to maximize that light in that world that does feel dark.
Thank you so much, Kaia. And I think, what was really coming through for me there was, premise for me of kind of learning to walk in the dark is that the dark and the night are constantly coexisting as well. And, Viv, you named the grief that you're holding for the loss of your mother. And grief is also something that coexists. When we are navigating our days, our weeks, our months, we can still experience joy and experience grief at the same time. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can integrate both. And it was really coming through what you were saying, Kaia, there as well, of just your experience of being in the world at the moment, which I think is, really resonates with me as well, of how can I continue to navigate the grief of our times and at the same time remain anchored in stability, groundedness, hope, empathy, the thing that keeps us going. I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to add there, or anything that you would really like to invite the listener into in this moment.
I like that last bit, anything to invite the listener into. I think maybe it's the invitation is, how do we, with all that's going on around, how do you, the listener, ensure that you create space to listen to your own deep inner wisdom? Because I really do believe that for all of us, that whatever we're going through in life and wherever life is calling us, that we all have the answer within, but sometimes life just gets too noisy and it gets too full of stuff. So how can the listener, and I'm asking myself as well the question, Viv, what do you need to provide for yourself, particularly with where I am right now, just to allow that inner wisdom to arise and to help me to sort of navigate this particular season?
Thank you. Kaia?
Yeah, definitely what Viv said. And I think just right now, just please hold on to and see the hope in everything, and see that even when the world feels like it's in absolute shambles, there is so much around us. Those glimmers for us to remind us of our existence, ourselves, and the beauty of the human experience. Recognize your grief and recognize the deepest parts of you that are upset or angry or feeling shameful, because I think that we love to think of it in binaries, right? But the whole experience is very much nuanced. So please hold on to your nuance, embrace it, because that very nuance is your human experience and completely normal. And we all should hold space for that.
Thank you so much to both of you. I really do feel so much collaboration afoot for the both of you and the work that you both share. So I feel really excited of kind of like step one of spending an hour with both of you. You're both such brilliant, wonderful humans that I feel so honoured to know. Thank you so much for all of the work that you do, everything that you bring to the world, and for the last hour of your time together. So thank you to both of you.
And thank you.
Thank you for listening. It's great to have you with me on this journey towards higher love for all. Our time is our greatest commodity and gift, so thanks for investing it in yourself and sharing it with me. Please do take a moment to rate and review the show, all of which enables more people to find me and for me to connect with more great guests each week for both yours and my enjoyment. All links, references and contact information is detailed too within the show notes. And I always love to hear your feedback, so feel free to hit me up on my Instagram at higherlove_with_Megan or via my website higher-love.com. Send your takeaways, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share or send on to someone else who would benefit. Until next time, big love.